Hello and welcome to Small Things Brought Together. My name is Robin Love, and this is an ongoing conversation with artists about their creative process. We take up a long format. We don't try to make sound bites. We dig in, we allow for silence, and we see where it goes. So I am extremely happy to have returning the first ever take two artist Shea in the Catskills. Shea was the very first person whom I interviewed for when I shifted the format of Small Things Brought Together from a sort of instructional video series to digging in with artists, and Shea bravely agreed to be the first person in a very different time in her life at that time. So as you know, Shea, the format is basically unchanged in that I say just a little, but then the floor is open, and yeah, I'm not standing here with any special power or authority. So yeah, so when we spoke first, you were a monastic at Zen Mountain Monastery and fully ordained, and your working with art came about largely because it's a part of the spiritual practice at Zen Mountain Monastery. It's considered one of the gates of training, in fact. And you were doing you were doing mosaics and watercolors, I believe. So much has happened since then. So maybe, what would you like to share to kick that off? That much has happened.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm so excited to talk to you again and have a sort of conversation about what we're finding juicy right now. At the time that we spoke last time, I was in the midst of what turned out to be leaving the monastery. And when I even look at myself in that video now, I think, oh my God, it was like a different person. So I left the monastery, moved out in September of 2019. I went with you to Newfoundland as part of my setting off on this re-entering lay life adventure. And about 2 weeks before lockdown, I released my monastic vows with my teacher in a very small, short, private ceremony, thinking that my whole, lay life lay before me. And then 2 weeks later, so I found myself incredibly well trained for lockdown life. And I've essentially been, hermiting in this beautiful home that I now live in. And my art practice has changed a lot. And when I look back at that time and what I was doing, making mosaics and making those paintings, I actually see it from this place is that I was building a bridge for me to be able to leave the monastery. I was creating a way for myself, something that I could be an artist, and a practice that could be a refuge for me as I transitioned out of what I thought was going to be the rest of my life, and that I had spent close to 15 years inside of. And so, as you know, I bring all of that training to the life I have now, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. I think it makes my life I couldn't have the life that I'm living now and be enjoying it to the extent that I am without having had all of that training in mind training, liturgical training, art practice training. And so, as we'll get into, I haven't been making much visual art in the last year. My creative practice has really shifted more towards creating curriculum for classes that I teach. But that's kind of what's happening here. I live 3 miles from the monastery, right down the road. in love with the land here. So that's really what anchors me to this place.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I can't help as you sort of describe that the wild ride the last several years. And I can't help but just think about memories of sitting in the dining hall at the monastery and you sort of being like questioning, like, wait, I could do this? Kind of having these like, wait, what? You know, and really just, yeah, it just suddenly had like a real flashback to I feel like I can picture us sitting at a particular table, having a particular conversation. And that was you just kind of like reaching your your arm out and going like, whoa, over here. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking about, that's so interesting to hear you say that, because it's kind of like, wow, I needed so much structure and containment to find enough freedom to be able to be like, this is, this is what I want. And I can remember like the last couple of years I was at the monastery, burning a lot of time on the cushion, like visualizing like a studio and like what I would have inside of it. And it was, it was really like, I was completely obsessed. I remember talking to my teacher about it at the time, and he was characteristically like non-alarmist about it, but there was like a 5-alarm fire going off in me. But that's the thing, is that when I think back to when I started practice, or when I encountered the monastery, which was late 2004, there was no way that person could have sat down with materials. And even 2015, that person could not have done that. So it all kind of makes sense from here. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we hit record, I was telling you that I have a group where we study the Yoga Sutra in a non-hierarchical, non-patriarchal way. And one of the women in the group is a landscaper. And she was talking about how when you build a deck, which I guess is part of her work, her and her husband, they build decks and plant gardens. And she said, if you were to build a deck and not have any railing, you would intuitively, instinctively stay quite far away from the edge, just because you wouldn't want to accidentally fall off, right? So you would stay kind of close to the center, because you would know that if you stopped paying attention, you would fall off the deck. But then you put up a railing and people can go right to the edge, and in fact, lean over the edge and look out. And she's like, we need the railing.
I love that. Yeah. We need the railing until we know how to make our own, create a railing, take it down, ourselves completely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and just for, on my end, I feel like you're coming to Newfoundland and then, created a new depth to our friendship.
1,000%.
And somehow, in the bizarreness of the pandemic, which put so much stuff online, it actually, I feel like, has been a help in us maintaining and deepening that friendship. So
agreed completely. 1,000%.
And especially conversations around creative process. And just want to say, I consider Shea like the #1 fan of Small Things Brought Together.
It's true. It's true. If you ask me to create, like, what's your favorite show to watch? Long form artist interviews. It feels like a love letter and a gift to me. So yes, it's my favorite show.
Yeah. And personally, I feel like I don't know if I could do it without you. So there we go.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, so that's why it is actually even more thrilling and nourishing to have you right now here to share with. Can we just talk about, like, what do you mean when you say writing curriculum as an art form? I mean, there's a conversation to have. But I know you also have brought some other questions, and maybe that will come up within them. So
Great.
and I love that you brought your own question.
Well, I mean, here's the thing is that I feel like our sort of regular conversations are so much small things brought together, but like when you actually record episodes, you're asking the questions. Carrie Heater gave you a run for your money.
She
She
sure
asked,
did.
and she, yeah, and having talked to her, I understand now, like that's her whole brand. Her lane is asking amazing questions. But I feel like, I would love to draw you out a little bit about your process, because you interview these amazing people, but also you are an amazing artist whose spiritual practice deeply informs your creative, is the basis of your creative work. And I just think it would be interesting for people to hear more about that. And I'd love to talk to you about that.
Well, thank you for saying all those nice things. And, it's, I guess, on this side of it, it's always a question of like, how much of my own story do I bring into the conversation? Nobody's here to hear me talk necessarily, but at the same time, there are conversations, they are conversational, and that is very deliberate. So it's not an artist giving an artist talk.
Oh, completely. No, there is a total give and take. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and sometimes, sometimes when I first communicate with an artist and say, hey, are you interested? I have to essentially have to convince them that it's not them standing in front of a group of people with slides at the ready, like in a lecture hall, because lots of them are very familiar with that format, have done it, etc. And it's like, no, it's something else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so actually, thinking about this is something that I've heard Adrienne Marie Brown talk about. She is a host or co-host of 3 different podcasts, I think, at this point. And, she talks about conversation as an art form, as a creative practice in and of itself. And I mean, that feels so resonant for me because I do a lot of thinking in isolation, often out loud, by myself. And, I feel like some of my best thinking happens in conversation.
Yeah. 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 And, we have had many conversations around this idea of the gossip and how women talking to other women has been historically the way knowledge is shared and wisdom passed down, and shutting down, severing that lineage has been such a vital part of patriarchy that, yeah, we now people now have to find a way to rebuild that connection and rediscover it.
I love that you bring that up. I was talking to my mom earlier today, and she was telling me she found this article about somewhere in the world they found these very old images of female goddess figurines, and she was like, I thought of you, and she said, we had a good run there, didn't we? Women, from that to throwing us on a pyre and burning, she's such a way of putting things. I come by it honestly, but it makes me think actually in praying the Rosary, the second joyful mystery is the visitation, and it's when Mary, who's pregnant, goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is also improbably pregnant. Elizabeth is a postmenopausal woman who was never able to get pregnant, and yet here she is pregnant. And these 2 women get together, a young woman and an older woman. And it's the most joyful of the joyful mysteries as far as I'm concerned. And what are they talking about? They're plotting revolution. They're talking about, that the rich will be brought low and the low will be lifted up. So there's a reason why this connection, particularly among women, has been severed and interrupted, because it's dangerous. It's dangerous when I was listening to a episode of For the Wild podcast today. It was a rebroadcast of Trisha Hersey of the Nat Ministry. She said, the powers that be don't want us to rest. They don't want us to talk to each other. They don't want us to rest, because, it's these connections that can disrupt. I know we're already headed into overcultural territory, but that's inevitable in a conversation. But these things that have been so trivialized, it's gossip, it's women just it's actually quite powerful, to be connected, to be in solidarity with each other,
to know it's safe.
And I think for a long time it hasn't been safe.
Yeah.
Right. So this reaching out for each other again, this reaching out for our mothers and our siblings and our connections where we've been taught to mistrust each other, and to do the work of proving that we can actually stay in connection with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's such a heartbreak,
It's a ripper, as Hojin would say.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking at your questions. Yeah, well, maybe to circle it back to, okay, how does curriculum writing, which cannot be an art form, which sounds about the most Capricorn-esque thing I could possibly say.
Yeah. Curriculum is an art form. It's like, whenever I think about this, I think of our mutual friend, Chelsea Green, who has been a teacher for many, many years. And it's like, how do you, there's an endless number of ways that you could configure a container for imparting information or eliciting people's ideas and minds and hearts around a subject. Someone who's teaching or running a workshop is basically creating that container, is creating that structure where something is going to happen. And it's like thinking about, well, what do I actually want to happen? And how the reason why I think for me it's been a creative process is because often, like making a painting, I don't know what I want to happen until it's happening. and sort of, I think that the way that I have written curriculum and created classes has been very much like making paintings, in the sense that I don't know I don't have a sense of what the finished thing is going to look like. I just start with an enthusiasm, a question, a curiosity, a wondering, and I let that lead me in. And, I think without having made 500 paintings, I wouldn't have had the confidence to do it in this kind of format of teaching.
I love that. Enthusiasm, confidence, curiosity. Yes. Yeah. And, it also, now Carrie Heater keeps coming back again and again to our, this idea that you're designing an experience. And I sometimes think about art that way too, of visual art that way too, in the sense of, we're designing an experience for the audience, the viewer, the participant, and yeah, it can look like a painting, it can look like an installation, it can look like a class or a practice, or yeah.
And I think that if I had tried to make a class before I started doing art practice, I just think of how much or how little I am trying to control what's happening in a class. The things that I'm trying to control for, I guess, or the things that I'm centering in the experience are that people feel like safe, seen, and included. That they feel like their questions and curiosities are just as exciting to me as they might be to them. Because for me, that has been a place where I feel like I can relax enough to really let something fresh in. And so I have an agenda, and I also build a lot of space into that. And, those are the things that are just important to me. And I think that, I think this is often true with many things, is that it's in having experiences where that didn't go well for me on the receiving end helps me understand how I want it to be different for people, that I'm providing that space for. And that also, right, like, I'm learning. I always feel like I'm getting away with something when I'm teaching a class, because I can't believe how much I learn from people, especially tarot classes. Rank beginners say the most. I'm like, what? I cannot believe you paid me for me to learn that from you. That's incredible. Yeah.
Can we just say, by the way, what you teach mostly, not always, is around tarot, by the way. We didn't think we said that, but yes. Yeah. I mean, here's another like unlearning to be done, around which this has been massive for me, and I'm very imperfect in it, but like how to facilitate an experience where people can draw out their wisdom that they already contain and offer, that doesn't always have to look like I'm the teacher, listen, that's been, because that's mostly how I have learned, in fact. So
that's kind of the setup in the culture.
It's a lot to unlearn. Yeah. And not even knowing that there's something to unlearn or change or do differently, that it's sometimes I'm a little shocked.
What helps you do that? Like, what has helped you like start to shift that in your own experience?
Well, truthfully, being in classes where people are doing it, being like, oh, that's how it's done. Okay. Being in your classes, quite frankly, I have learned a ton. And, and it never hurts to get some negative feedback from your students.
Oh, totally.
Which I have.
Same. Amazing.
Yeah. The brutal teaching.
I know, brutal and so effective, though, isn't it?
Yeah. So much gratitude.
It's nice, though, to recognize, that it's possible to learn from both, though.
Yeah.
That actually, I feel like I'm so much more porous and receptive when I feel safe and seen and heard, and like someone's really getting what I'm talking about, someone's drawing me out. That really helps me take a risk and, think a thought I haven't thought before,
Yeah. I feel like you've also said here and there, like, most of us just want to be witnessed in whatever, a moment or an emotion and yeah, I think I have not always appreciated that, the power of that. Yeah.
You know, this wasn't in my questions, but it's something that you and I have talked about related to this, having to do with sort of audience and social media and like, you know, being witnessed, being liked, being versus being witnessed, you know, and the idea of, you know, what we share and why, with whom. And, you know, I have a very, I was going to say I have a very conflicted relationship with social media. I don't actually, it's not that conflicted. I don't use it that much. It's not, you know, I refuse to feed the algorithm. I won't show my face. I feel like, and I just want to say, this is me, zero, like I'm not, whatever anyone else does is like, to quote the great Miriam Kaba, I am not interested in judging people for their personal decisions. It's just not interesting to me at all. But I think about that when I do create something, I want it to be seen. I want it to be, you know, but not by like an anonymous sort of like, I want it to be seen by you or by Chelsea or by, you know, by one of my friends, or, you know, there's that, like, why do we make things? Why do you make things? And who are they for?
I mean, I feel like I never quite put this together until just this very moment, but I was actually talking to a friend earlier about a teaching situation, and in that course of that, I was like, oh, I had an agenda. And I can recall in my body the feeling, it's not pleasant, of being in the sort of teacher position with an agenda versus this kind of more like open, receptive, you know, maybe with something to share, but kind of definitely working off of where is the student. And you then saying like showing up without an agenda, and this question around like who is the art for, you know, I feel like there's like a texture to the experience of making art with an agenda, which many, I feel like you could look at art and say, well, this artist clearly had some kind of social or political or whatever agenda, and that may even be part of it, but like, was it created? How was it actually created? And was the agenda the foundation, the root, or the byproduct? I guess I don't know how to say it, but for me, a lot of it has been a misplaced agenda, and so I feel like I'm just now in my middle age, like being like, oh, the impulse to create is to be followed. And sort of the agenda takes care of itself, you know, or but
So,
if it yeah.
No, keep going, keep going.
Well, just this idea, like it can't actually be the foundation or the root.
The agenda, you mean?
Yeah.
And can you say more what you mean about, say more about the misplaced agenda?
I guess that's what I mean, you know.
You mean misplacing it at the beginning of the process or as the root of the process?
Yeah, because
very interesting. Yeah.
It's funny though, because there's a moment where like, you know, I've had some kind of impulse to create something, and clearly it's resonant with other people. It's just like, you know, it strikes a chord in the moment that we're in for whatever reason. And then, you know, opportunities might come to like, oh, now do this project or do that project. And suddenly that initial impulse starts to transform into like a, if you want to call it an agenda or a particular direction, perspective. And I feel like this has happened multiple times over my life where that impulse, which I would say is playful and genuine, gets sort of picked up, and now it's like brought over here, and then that sort of sucks the joy out of it. It becomes this other thing, and it's no longer, the vitality is gone. Yeah.
It's like the artwork is being witnessed before it's actually been created. It starts,
Yeah.
it's the audience actually moves into your studio before you've done the making.
But it's tricky because, like, we're all living in this world, and like, if opportunities are coming, are you going to say no?
I
Well,
mean, that,
actually, the answer has to be yes, that you say no.
I think that's the difference between, when I moved out of the monastery, I knew very clearly that I wasn't going to tie paying my rent to art making. Total separation of church and state for me. And so I understand that for people where those things are one and the same, that's a whole different set of concerns and considerations that I don't relate to. And like, without any judgment on either end, but for me, like, making things, creating things is, it's medicine. It's like, it's medicine for me, and it is my spiritual life and practice. And so I have the great good fortune and privilege to have a current setup where I can, those things are very separate. And my making has become very much about, and this is something else that I feel like I sort of receive from Chelsea, is the sort of making things for people, my art making as gift making, as opposed to, things that end up, taking up space in my studio, or I don't know what to do with, or, whatever. So, I mean, there's so many different considerations, but I think that, I guess I love the frame and consideration of misplaced agenda. I feel like that's so, there's so much there. And also that when the making is informed by a question of the heart, a question of when it's existential, when it's devotional, when it's, that's the process that's really so interesting to me. And I'm curious about what that's like for you.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's why artists that I really admire, even who have a social or political message in their work, to me, that's what, there's a difference between them and maybe some other artists,
How so? What is that difference?
I mean, I feel like it's a feeling, it's just a feeling. So it's hard to say. Yeah. And maybe it's a little bit like that sort of the teacher experience of like, oh, I don't want to feel like someone's telling me how to feel. They're giving me the space to feel. And yeah. And have that thought that I might have been too scared to have earlier,
Yes.
Yeah, but that's like that's a feeling of like being in the presence of art someone else has made. I don't know, you're catching me at this funny moment. I was thinking about how there's also been times like that have punctuated my art making where like I was doing one thing, and then in the course of like a week, it just goes like, and it's not really, hasn't always been like the most pleasant week or whatever you want to say, but yeah, I really don't know what I'm doing right now, but it feels amazing. And
I can feel that over here as you say it. Keep going.
I mean, to talk about like joyful and playful and, kind of waking up in the morning and being like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to get in there and muck around with this stuff. And who would have guessed, even 2 weeks ago, this was where I was headed. Not me. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty, well, it almost feels a little like I don't want to say too much because
Yes.
very, very in formation. So
Blessed be. I feel like you're describing such a moment or period of grace. It's like you cannot make that happen. It's like practice of any kind. It's like all you can do is like nourish the conditions, create conducive conditions for a moment of grace to occur. It's almost like, and maybe this actually pivots us into this question of what does practice mean? That, you know, I feel like this is from my Zen training, this sort of like sudden gradual school, sudden enlightenment, gradual, but like really there is no, nothing is hidden ever, right? And we have moments of grace where that is apparent to us, or in a very like felt undeniable, like I cannot wait to get out of bed and like muck about kind of way. And the rest of the time, when that is not immediately accessible to us, there are things that we can do, practices that help create conducive conditions of ripening for that to appear more frequently, and like to just, I think also name that it's good to just give up the fantasy that like we can be in that state constantly. I don't think that that's actually possible. I think that the moving in and out and all the friction and all the like things, and that's all gets fed into, but I think for many years, and probably still even residually, I have that sort of, if it's not happening, it means there's something wrong, or I'm not practicing hard enough, or la, 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 blah, blah. So like recognizably not interesting to me. But so all of that. And then, so the question of then like, what is practice?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, there's something to be said about like getting your ass in the studio every day or putting your ass on the cushion or whatever it is, whatever the practice is, right? Like if you don't do those things, we know what will happen. So there is that, but then there's also something to like holding that lightly and not, that sort of beating yourself up because, oh my God, I didn't get and then also that those fallow times of trusting, just what you said, it's not meant to be full on blooming all the time ceaselessly. No, nothing in nature looks that way or occurs that way ever.
I thought, I went to San Diego many years ago with an ex of mine. And, every day we were there was 75 degrees and sunny. And I was like, get me out of here immediately. I actually, haha. And also I need 4 seasons. I need it mirrored. I need that process of like, things aren't blooming 12 months out of a year. Nothing but racial capitalism thinks that it can grow constantly and never have decay and composting and death.
I mean, that makes me think about your teaching on like the new moon and the death card and the tower, and the ones that feel scary and dark. And yeah, I feel like that's something that you have truly taught me, is to be less fearful of that sort of dark, the time where it's like there's nothing showing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing showing. We can't see necessarily. I mean, I really think that we are living in a sort of like extreme of, light culture, disembodied ascension, light fantasy, it's like, um, every from spiritual culture to, we live in a white supremacist culture. And so darkness is, we can see it everywhere. It's our cultural shadow, everything, being afraid of the dark. And really, there's so much, there's so much magic that happens in the dark, but we are conditioned deeply, like viscerally, like nervous system wise, to be afraid of the dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love what you said about, like, we all know what's going to happen if you like don't show up at the studio or on the cushion, like nothing's going to happen. And like holding that lightly, like this was the part of the conversation I was having with a friend of mine who's my voice teacher, who trained as an opera singer. Like, talk about some patriarchal training, and we talked about like another friend of mine who was trained as an engineer, but is no longer practicing as an engineer. And it's like, I trained as a monastic. So we, these three women, we went through this very deep training, like very like, not kind of like just a few years of this and that or whatever. And that like is like knitted into our beings. There's no sort of getting rid of it. And so this whole idea that I have to I guess I really relate to what you're saying about holding it lightly. And the thing that I was sort of saying to my friend who was trained as an opera singer is that, like, when I started studying tarot, my tarot mentor wanted to kind of train me in a whole framework. And I was like, in a whole system. And I was like, actually, I have done enough training in a system for a lifetime. Like, I do not want to learn another system. I'm good there. And I think that it's actually, for women, for people socialized as women, but also like lots of other people too, that it can be hard to trust that, like, actually I know enough to make my daily experience a teacher. I can trust what I am curious about. I can opt to not give any attention to things that don't interest me. And that, like, that my practice can sort of manifest as sort of, so it's not a rationalization, right? Like, and I don't think I have to like do a lot of reps at this point to kind of suck the juice out of my life. Like, I feel like that impulse to want to suck the juice out of my life, that is my practice manifesting itself. I trust my pleasure, my curiosity, my enthusiasm, and everything else I can just relax about, instead of this, but I'm not doing this, or I should be doing that. It's like, as the great Toni Morrison said, no. Who benefits from all of that,
Yeah, good question right there. Who benefits from that? Not you, not me. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so much there. Thank you. So much there. Yeah, I really feel like also, well, sort of what you were saying earlier about like, there's a fiction that we're supposed to always be in the peak experience, or we're doing something wrong. And if we're not, then something's wrong with us. Yeah, something's wrong with us. It's not even that we're doing, it's like we are wrong somehow. Yeah. And there's something about I actually think there's something about practice, whether it's making art or sitting on a cushion or doing movements with your body and breathing in a particular way. Over time, repetitively over time, showing up again and again and again, where it's like you just can't maintain that fiction. It's just because it's like not how it goes, right? You can't, like that thing starts to be revealed as fiction. And it's only through a like enormous amount of effort that you would cling to the idea that,
I know. So much effort.
So much effort. And then that makes I feel like I'm just repeating what you said, but there you go. Like it makes those times where it's like, oh, nothing's really happening. Like there is a trust in that nothing really happening time. And a trust in like, maybe I just don't know what's happening. And this is the other fiction that we're supposed to know all the time. Like we don't. I don't know. I'll just speak for myself. I have so little idea of what's going on at any given moment.
I feel like that's just wisdom flowering when we begin to actually like be able to admit that to ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea that I actually know what the results are from a dedicated practice of any kind is like, I don't know.
When I was learning about praying the Rosary, the way they sort of talked about, we say 1 Our Father and 10 Hail Marys, and so we end up saying 5 Our Fathers and 50 Hail Marys by the time we say a whole Rosary. And it's like, that Our Father is the sort of like, our head is above water in the daylight. We like know what's going on, and then we plunge underwater for the 10, and that's the ratio. Is sort of like we're up here in the daylight, and then we submerge, and we like learn how to breathe underwater, and we like we kind of let the mystery do its work, and then we come back up 1, and then down for 10 more, and that ratio is the corrective to me of like the sort of way that the culture is, and that there's so much mystery and magic afoot, that if we are looking for it, we have like narrowed and missed and so it's interesting, that Zen, was it Zuedo who said, no, I can't remember who it was who said not knowing is most intimate. And that, sounds, I don't know what it has a particular flavor to me from hearing it for so many years, but it's true, is that all of these things that are happening beneath the surface. I mean, where does that moment of grace that sneaks up on us and opens up a portal, or, pulls the veil from, and like lets us enter that place for a little while. It's it's all, it's like I don't think I was a very childlike child, but I imagine that this is how it is for children, before the culture gets to them. They're aware of all of these portals opening. They can create worlds like, and I feel like as I get older, I'm getting younger and getting back in touch with that. I needed all of that sort of structure and holding, and I needed to know what to do. And here's when you hit the bell and blah, 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 to be able to like play or relax. For me, it's really relaxation that both lets me rest in the sort of like, I don't know what's going on, and lets me recognize when something is going on.
Yeah. 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 Let's not forget that part for sure. Can I ask a question though? Because you said earlier, like you've learned enough systems for a lifetime, which I believe, and and now you've mentioned that you pray the Rosary. So would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah. Um,
If that's not contradictory, I'm curious.
well, the Rosary, I don't think of it as a system.
Okay.
I mean, you know, anyone can like learn the prayers in about 5 minutes, and then that's it. There's nothing more to learn. You don't get better at like saying the prayers. You like don't progress to any levels. You can meditate on the mysteries or not, you know. It's really, at least the way that my devotion has taken shape. And it's through Way of the Rose is the community that I pray with is, yeah, the system is sort of make it work for you, you know, like if you're not into the whole like Jesus thing, like rewrite the prayer so it works for you. Just don't like be policing anybody else's way of saying the prayer. It's a very, yeah, it's definitely not a system to me. It's almost, because it's so rote, like I can be like praying while I'm like doing anything else, driving or cooking or anything, that my mind can be a number of different places while I'm praying is so like antithetical to my Zen training.
I
It's
was
like
gonna say like, opposite.
opposite. And for me, I feel like it's really helped me trust that childlike drift up, that I can let my mind drift, and who the hell knows what's going to appear.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like
And,
maybe opposite, yet at the same time, like
yes,
place where it meets again.
absolutely. That's the thing. They're not actually like in conflict with each other. I think that the training of like, put your mind here, like I did it, I did it to my utmost. And like, I wasn't that great at it. And really learning to normalize and enjoy the way that my mind functions and works has been so important to my life and all the facets of my practice. And I don't think that anyone was doing anything to me over there, but I did something to myself within that container that was not, at a certain point it was conducive, and then it stopped being conducive.
Yeah.
And that to me is just, I think, what we need can change.
Yeah.
You know, and to really, you know, it's, you can look at that, one could look at that as like a failure. I don't, you know, but like what we need changes. And so learning how to, I think that, you know, the thing that makes this kind of come back together is learning how to give ourselves what we need, is the place where these circle back and kind of intersect again, is the place where they're not in conflict, and to me is the essence, the sort of delicious, juicy center of the creative process and the imagination and the heart mind, is like that we can give ourselves and each other what we need.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just another way of saying like the agenda isn't at the root. But it's, you know, I like the way you're saying it, but yeah, it makes,
no, it's true.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say, in case anyone was watching this and hears the word Rosary and thinks Catholic Church, you're not.
Oh, bless you, thank you. And no church.
Yeah.
Definitely no Catholic Church. no shade to the Catholics, but the Catholic Church is super violent and many other things. And so, yes, it is an anarchic, eco-feminist rosary devotion. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about like the physical act of using a rosary, it's, to me, it's just like there's something so human about it, in the sense of like a repetition. Obviously my area of knowledge is more in like yoga, and japa is the repetition of mantra.
Right.
And it's
All of these traditions. Yes.
It's a path to enlightenment.
Every culture, kind of everywhere pretty much, has used beads and, muttering.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In The Way of the Rose, which is a great book, I recommend. And there's a little bit where they talk about how sort of a meditation practice of like sitting still and being quiet, and I'm not saying I like believe all of this wholesale. I just think it's an interesting sort of thing to think about, is, men hunting, having to wait and sit and observe and be aware, and, for long periods of time. Whereas, and I hate gender essentialism. So just like follow along here, but don't think that I'm like essentializing gender, because the gender binary is violent. But, and then the women sitting around muttering with each other, collecting things, that's, you have like the rosary and like seated meditation in those two kind of activities. And yeah, I mean, I think about it now. I don't know that I could sit still for 35 minutes. I think that is just gone forever for me.
I'm sure you could if you wanted to.
If I wanted to, yeah, that's really the heart of the matter. There was something I wanted to ask you. It's gone. I want to talk about liturgy, though.
Me too.
I want to make sure we get to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have things to say, but I want to hear from you. What I think of you, so just like full disclosure, I think of you as a liturgist because that was often your role at the monastery, which is liturgist, meaning the person leading the chants in the services. And yeah, I feel like you really just truly embodied that role, took it up wholeheartedly, and has, for me, as someone still in that tradition and practice, like I draw upon your example every day.
I mean, I still consider myself a liturgist. I feel like that's like my lane. It's, and I was thinking about the other day, I'm sure you remember this as well. We were in a retreat at the monastery in the Sangha house, and Shugen who's the abbot at the monastery, was saying in his fashion, as he very often would, about, how liturgy can be so hard to enter. And you and I were both like, wait a minute, actually, not my experience at all. When I was speaking to Carrie here recently, I was talking about the very first time I went to the temple. It was my first exposure to Zen. The very first thing you do at a Sunday morning program is a chanting service. And I remember holding that sutra book and being in this room full of strangers, having just touched my forehead to the floor in a prostration, like, what? Oh, I guess we're bowing now. Okay. And feeling like I have been doing this for thousands of years. That was the hook.
Yeah.
And it's the thing I miss the most, actually. And that communal experience. I remember setting up an altar for, I don't know if it was Earth Day or something at the monastery with the other women monastics. We were walking around the grounds, gathering altar implements for an outdoor altar. And we were in silence. It was a session. And I was like, we have been doing this for thousands of years, arranging space on the earth in order to like create something.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I really relate to it. And I also see that people have a lot of suspicion, residual suspicion from bad experiences with religion around altars and liturgy. And again, like this trust, like trust in that feeling that you had. Like you trusted enough. You were bowing and now you're chanting and like, what the heck? And like, you trusted that feeling of like, oh, this, I know this in my bones, cells. I don't know, put words in your mouth, but yeah. And I don't know that everyone walks in the door with that trust.
I mean, thank you for naming that. I had no religious upbringing whatsoever. And I think it's really important what you're naming is that people come into these spaces with intense personal and generational religious trauma. That, you know, I mean, it's just so, to think of the crimes of organized religion, to rob people of their ancient connection to these ancient human practices. It's very painful, but important to name, because the reason that it is hard for some people to enter, I think really like needs to be validated. And so, you know, how to reclaim this, I think is so, is where liturgy gets so interesting, because it can, what I came to think of liturgy as is using the meaning making part of our mind intentionally.
Mm. I love that.
You know, it's like we tell stories, we're meaning making machines. That's what human beings are. It's what makes us human. And liturgy says, okay, we're going to like harness that purposefully. We're going to use your thoughts, your speech, and your body on purpose. We're going to like create the physical space on purpose. This was something I talked to Carrie Heater about was, you know, we are feeding our senses 24/7, 365. So, you know, my room is essentially an altar, the whole thing. So that no matter what else is going, you know, I went through quite a depression at the end of last summer. The only thing that I could control is that like, while I was like laying in bed being depressed, I could look around and I was surrounded by beauty and things that were meaningful to me. Right. And so it's so powerful. We're practicing, you know, we're in the midst of a liturgy all the time. Has it been created for us by capitalism? Is it the liturgy of, are you feeling a little bad? Buy this. You know, here, do you have this? You don't have this? What's wrong with you? There's that liturgy, you know, and sort of reclaiming our attention and our bodies and our senses and our space, you know, that to me is sort of liturgy minus religion.
Yeah. And I just, I feel like the process of discovery around our own, like what is liturgy to us, what liturgy makes sense to us, resonates for us, you know, that is like such a creative process, if we want to call it that, or it is just like, I don't know, this is the practice to me, like, oh, really just like honing in, what is the value, what do I value, you know? And
yeah, what is beauty to me?
yeah,
What colors do I like?
what sounds coming out of my mouth ring true?
What words are words of power for me on
Yeah,
this day?
yeah, yeah,
What clothing, what jewelry, what music, I mean, to really take ourselves seriously enough to be interested in what makes us feel powerful, whole, safe, whatever we want to feel. What do we want to feel? We could start there.
it's a good question.
How do we want to feel?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that is a very serious question. Because I feel like, oh, it's easy to say, well, I want to feel happy. I want to feel good. And it's like, I don't know. That's a question of a lifetime, many lifetimes. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful practice, if we want to call it that. I feel like since leaving the monastery, my sort of guidepost, signpost practice for how I want to feel is I want to attune to my pleasure,
Mm.
and that has been cheapened by the culture, what that means, how to get that. And, there's a card in the tarot, the judgment card, number 20 in the tarot, that I like to think about as the pleasure that comes from living a life in alignment with our deepest values.
Mm.
Like there's a pleasure that you can't buy, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to know what your values are. You have to take your life seriously enough to want to know that. And, and so point being is that, like, for now it's pleasure. That might change. I mean, that's the thing, is like, we are in the midst of this experiment, this like great work of our lives.
Yeah.
And there's so much we can't control.
Yes.
And so being interested in the things that we can create and control for through our creations.
Yeah. Yeah. And for, I feel like there's so many people, myself included, basically trained to think pleasure is bad.
Who benefits from that?
Right? Oh, talk another ripper. Yeah, and yeah. And it's like there's sort of this, yeah, like pleasure. It might not be what you think it is, kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Someone recommended this TV show. I guess it's a TV show called Station 11. Have you heard of it?
I heard of the novel.
Yeah, it comes from a novel, right? It's about a pandemic that sweeps across the globe and kills almost everyone. Basically, like unlike COVID, if you get it, you die within a few hours. Like it's sort of that fast, And I watched the first episode, which I was sort of like, should I, kind of thing. And, it was gripping, and it was sort of one of these, like, I can't look away kind of horror things. And like, it's really well done, and the acting's great and all this. But the next day I had like an anxiety attack, which I have not had in a long time. And it was really around this idea of like, everything we know is ending. Everything I know is ending and changing, and I can't do anything about it. And it was just like sitting there like, and in my mind racing ahead, I'm going to starve. I'll be stuck on an island and there'll be no food and the water will rise and the this and the that and my neighbors will come and seize my belongings. Like, where does the mind go in one of those states? Like craziness. And kind of what is the antidote to that? Actually.
I mean, do you have an idea about that? About what the antidote is?
Well, for me, the antidote has been like, I keep looking up because it's on my wall. It's like, make this thing that I don't know why I'm making it. Like, just friggin' do it.
I mean, this, feels like it veers so much into my current kind of spiritual preoccupations, I mean, I feel like what you're talking about like looking at what's on your wall and being like, this is the thing I have to do, is sort of like, I frame that as the heart's desire, and this is a framing that I get from the Way of the Rose and from the work I've done with Perdita Finn in working with the dead. Perdita Finn is the one person who I've gotten the framing of the long story of the soul. And that to me is the antidote against this, what you're talking about, this sort of like anxiety about the world. And, we live in a time where time has become a line, that birth is the beginning and death is the end. And that's it. And I mean, what a stingy fucking framing that is, isn't it? One life, this is all you get, like, wow, only a settler colonial, white supremacist, capitalist, cis heteropatriarchal, situation could create such a stingy, framing of a human life.
Fearful.
Right. And, it's important for us to continue to be afraid, right? Because, people benefit from that. The ultra wealthy benefit from that. And the long story of the soul says we have been being born and dying forever, not even as humans, as everything. We've been everything. We have been, in many Buddhist traditions, we've been everyone's mother. They have been our mother. And, in that framing, time is a circle. In certain cultures, there is the word for great grandparent is the same as the word for child, because it just goes, okay, back again, and that circle, like a lunar cycle, like every cycle in nature, to me is the antidote. And so, because you can look at the long story and get very nihilistic about it, right? Like it doesn't matter. Well, that's where the heart's desire comes in. It locates me, you, in a particular time and place and life, this life. What is the fire in this heart at this moment, right? So both of those things are true, the sort of long story and the heart's desire. And I think that something that I got wrong for a long time is that everyone needs to kind of think like I do and do what I'm doing about the things that I think are wrong in the world.
Yes.
Right. And I was insufferable.
You're alone in that, just to say.
Yeah. I mean, I created a lot of harm and was really insufferable. That's a manifestation of white supremacy. I can now see. But to kind of leave each of us to our own heart's desire, not being interested in judging other people for their personal decisions, getting very interested in my personal decisions, understanding that I do have an influence on people, right? So it's not like what's important to me is meaningless and is not present in my life. It's completely infused with who I am. I just, that there's something about the super large, long story and the super granular heart's desire to me that really helps me navigate, the insanity. I think it was Sally Rooney's latest novel. She said, death is just the apocalypse in the first person. And that really helps me put into perspective, the horror of what's happening right now in this time, what we're doing to the earth. And also, this has been the earth, this has been going on for eons.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we do know it if we give ourselves permission to kind of linger. Like, we do know death is not a problem, I believe. We, meaning like people, beings. Like, we've done it so many times. It's not a problem. It's not actually the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when, the problem is sort of the total erasure of death from our culture, as I mean, how many? We're getting close to 1 million people dead of COVID in the United States. I don't even know how many. How's that? And, no, that is not visible to me. That is completely abstract. It's a number on a screen.
Yeah.
And, just the total hiding away of death and dying, and, the framing of death as a failure in our culture.
Yes.
Yeah,
and that sort of makes it easy. I've heard people describe, it's like, it's a death cult, it's a death cult. And it's like, oh, it's a death cult where death is hidden. And, what a seemingly contradictory, but actually very, I wanted to say like skillful, but like nefarious. I don't know,
diabolical.
Yeah, way of like, oh, huh.
I love that. It's really true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Death cult where death is completely hidden away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, how are we going to bring this in for a landing?
I know. Like, oh, here we are.
Okay.
I'm going to look over your questions.
Well, okay, we don't want to leave people on the diabolical note.
Yeah.
So, okay, how about, what are you excited about right now?
Yeah. Whew, it's, I am excited about this about trust. I'm excited about trusting ourselves and listening to that quiet voice. And then, even though it might seem crazy or difficult, following it, that's making me really excited. What about you?
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's now making me very excited too, actually. As you were saying that, following the quiet voice, I was thinking about my soul card, the High Priestess, yesterday, and thinking, to me, she is that quiet voice. And, I also just feel like I'm in a phase right now of stumbling into these weird convergences and coincidences and synchronicities, and opening a book that leads to another book, to a person, to a, it's like that sort of, right. Trusting that I am being led, not by having to like hold some tenuous state of mind, but just by, I think maybe getting in touch with a childlike part of myself, that trust that you're talking about. It's so deep, isn't it? Daido Roshi's 5th teaching was trust yourself. And it can sound so many things. And it's so profound.
Yeah. To really take that up, live it,
believe it. Yeah. Believe it, live it, lose it, find it.
Exactly. Disbelieve it, but still do it.
Love that. Love that. I feel like this was so big things. Like, I feel like we covered so much ground, and it also just felt like a regular Zoom call that we have.
May everyone have a friend that you can have these conversations with.
May it be so. May it be so.
Well, yeah, it makes me think, okay, I don't know how many episodes passed between, but yeah, let's do it again.
I love it. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.